what does Hashem Echad mean? That's a very difficult phrase, Hashem Echad. If I say Nehemia is one, what does that mean?
Okay.
What would you beat two?
Well, I mean, absolutely. Meaning meaning when it comes to God, well, I mean, now we're getting into really dangerous theological areas, where dangerous in the sense that we'll never get out of this topic.
Anyway,
meaning like the fact that Elohim has a plural ending.
Yes, beautiful. That makes sense in V, but it doesn't make sense in Deuteronomy.
Shalom and welcome to Hebrew Voices. I'm here today with Dr. Idan Dershowitz. He has earned his PhD in Biblical Studies from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. You have a book called The Valediction of Moses. So talk to me about the contents of the Valediction of Moses. That's what we're really excited
about. Okay, all right. So the Valediction of Moses, as I mentioned, has texts corresponding in some way or another to much of the narrative portions of Deuteronomy, but with many, many differences. So before we were talking about whether it's a summary or abridgment of Deuteronomy or vice versa. Right. So leaving aside whether it's authentic or not, right? Like if you think it's a forgery or if you think it's authentic, you still want to know whether this is something that is or is purporting to be an abridgment or something that is or is purporting to be ancestral. And so the scholars who suggested that this was another Dead Sea Scroll, so people like Mansour and Allegro and so on, they seem to have thought that this was a relatively late abridgment of Deuteronomy, but in other words, Hellenistic or something like that.
Okay.
So 2,000, a bit more than 2,000 years old, or something of that order. So let's look at some specific examples and see whether it looks like that. So, for example, we have in this manuscript a version of what in Deuteronomy is the story of the spies.
Okay.
Scouts.
Yeah.
So in the beginning of the book of Deuteronomy, we have a story about how the Israelites sent spies into Canaan, and then they came back, and their report was in some ways anxiety-inducing, and the people of Israel said they don't want to enter the land, and then some people did enter the land afterwards. They said they didn't want to enter the land, and then God got angry, and then some people just changed their minds and did try to enter the land, and then all of that. And some version of that story appears in this text, but there are no spies.
Okay.
The way the story is told is we reached the border of the land. God told you to conquer the land, and you said no. And so then God got angry with you. But nothing.
So where he says, your children who you said would die, is that mentioned there?
Here, I can read it, the English version, if you want. It's so short.
Can you share your screen and show us the text?
Yeah. So 1 second, let me.
So this is from your book.
Yeah. So here's the translation. It's really the beginning of the book. So it starts out, these are the words that Moses spoke according to the order of the Lord to all the children of Israel in the wilderness across the Jordan on the plain. Elohim, our God, spoke to us at Horeb as follows. You have been settled on this mountain for too long. Turn and journey, going to the Amorite highland, as well as into all the neighboring regions on the plain, the highland, the lowland, and the seacoast. So we set out from Horeb and traveled this whole great and terrible wilderness that you have seen, and we arrived at Kadesh Barnea. And I said to you, today you have arrived at the Amorite highland. Go up and take possession of the land, as Elohim, God of your fathers, promised you. But you did not assent to go up, and you complained, saying it is because Elohim hates us that he is handing us over to the Amorites to demolish us. Elohim's anger then burned, and he swore as follows, as I live, all the people who perceived, okay, this is the declarations and affirmations, this difficult phrase, doesn't matter, all of these people that who perceived the otot umuftim, so either declarations or wonders that I made 10 times over and did not have faith or heed my voice shall not see the good land that I swore to give to their fathers, except my servant Caleb, son of Yefuneh, and Joshua, son of Nun, who stands before you. They will go there, and to them I shall give it. And you turn and journey to the wilderness toward the Sea of Reeds until the death of the whole generation. I would maybe say the whole group, actually, is how I would translate it now.
Okay.
The people of the conflict from amid the camp. So we journeyed from Kadesh Barnea until the people of the conflict had completely died out from amid the camp. And that's the end of the story.
So it doesn't say why Caleb and Joshua were to be
Correct. Well, it doesn't say that actually in Deuteronomy either.
Okay.
Right? The Deuteronomy
Interesting.
talks about the spies. It does not say anything about, right? Let's we can read the version in Deuteronomy now. If 1 second.
All right. So it's Deuteronomy 136.
Yeah, I'm gonna share a different file here.
Okay.
And that has both versions, just in Hebrew though, but I can translate on the fly. How's that?
That's great.
So
wait, so there's a whole lot that's missing there. Meaning it's oh wow, that's a lot. All right.
Yeah. So anything that all these chunks are absent in the corresponding version, right? So on the right side we have the valediction of Moses. On the left side we have Deuteronomy.
Okay.
Dark gray means that it's something that's absent in the other one. Light gray means it's something that's different.
That's really interesting, and it's a bit of a sidetrack, but it's a topic very near and dear to my heart. So what is the treatment of the name Yud He Vav He in the valediction of Moses? Like I see here Elohim in the valediction of Moses, and in Deuteronomy it's Yud He Vav He, but then it says according to the mouth of Yud He Vav He, which isn't in Deuteronomy, right? So there's so what? And of
Do you want me to answer that now, or yeah, we can get it.
And then just some background. The usages of the names of God, let's call it, is a major part of let's say the critical approach of what's called the documentary hypothesis. So that screams.
Absolutely. So long story short, the valediction of Moses uses the name Elohim almost exclusively. But there are two exceptions, and the two exceptions are very similar to one another. The two exceptions are the first and last verse of the whole book. The first and last verse of the book say al pi Hashem, like have the tetragram. The last sentence is almost the same. So here it says, These are the words that Moses spoke according to the command or by the mouth of the Lord to all the children of Israel in the wilderness and across the Jordan in the Arava. And the very last verse says,
That's interesting. Tziva doesn't here mean command, according to what you're saying, because there are no commands.
Correct. But tziva also elsewhere, it's a very interesting topic, but there's precedent for that. Okay, so these are the two places where we see the tetragram. Elsewhere, it says Elohim. Even in places where,
what about in the Ten Commandments?
Elohim.
So he says, I am Elohim. Well, show us the Ten Commandments. That's cool.
Yeah. And the first and last verses have several things in common, but one of the things that they have in common is that they're not spoken by Moses, right? Before we were talking about who's speaking, right? So context here, obviously, apropos the question of whether this text is claiming to have been written by Moses, the book of Deuteronomy talks about the death of Moses. This verse here also talks about the death of Moses.
Well, the person who said Elah hadvarim, these are the words, wasn't he claiming that that he's quoting Moses?
Yes, he's claiming that he's quoting Moses, but he's not claiming to be Moses.
Okay.
The narrator isn't Moses. Moses is the character.
But then, according to, am I wrong that Moses, everything except the first and last verse here purports to be by Moses, doesn't it?
In the valediction of Moses.
Yeah, in the valediction of Moses.
In the valediction of Moses, yes, with maybe one other exception, which is comments on who lived where in in certain conquered areas. There are like these parentheticals where you could argue about who's talking. But in Deuteronomy, there are several places where it's not Moses. So you have Vezot bracha shel Moshe Isha Elohim lifnei moto. This is the
Deuteronomy 33, the blessing of Moses. Okay.
There are various other places where you
then
have
Moses died in the last 12 verses famously, so he must not have written that. Fair enough.
Yeah, it's a famous argument in the Talmud. There are several verses in Deuteronomy or passages or phrases where the context is post Moses. Anyway, these two verses are obviously not spoken by Moses. So why they use a different name is something, it's an interesting topic. One possibility is because, say, Moses doesn't use the name, but the narrator does. Maybe Moses is speaking. Maybe there's a problem with saying the tetragram, but there isn't a problem with writing it, which is actually something that's familiar to us, right? People, people.
And you're saying that could have gone back to the first temple period?
Maybe. I don't know. There are various different possibilities. You could also say maybe these were written by someone else, or maybe there's another possibility, which is that it has to do with the time of revelation. Like, when was this name revealed? Maybe it was revealed by the time of the narrator, but not by the time of the characters, according to this text. Who knows? It's an interesting question. But in any case, outside of the first and last verses of the
Can you show us the Ten Commandments where he says, I am Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God, and then here it must say something different?
By the way, the same thing appears in Psalms. What is it? Psalm 50, which references the Decalogue and uses Elohim.
Okay.
Am I right? I don't remember now.
But that's part of the so-called Elohist Psalms, meaning that there's a whole block of Psalms that some of them actually repeat verbatim other Psalms, and whatever it has Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, they replace it with Elohim.
Yeah, although you're assuming that they replaced it, and that is not.
Oh, I'm not assuming that. I mean, there are phrases that don't make any sense because they put in Elohim. Like it's Elohim Tzvaot, if I'm not mistaken, or something.
What's wrong with Elohim Tzvaot?
Well, first of all, it should be Elohim.
How is Hashem Tzvaot?
It should be Elohei Tzvaot, not Elohim Tzvaot.
But by the same token, it shouldn't be Hashem Tzvaot.
Why not?
Whatever problem that you have with Elohim Tzvaot applies to Hashem Tzvaot.
I don't see why. I mean, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh is a proper name, so.
Right, but proper names. So if the problem is that it needs to be in construct, then you can't put a proper name there. You would expect it. Like, what does it mean to say, like, David hosts, Nehemia hosts? Sounds weird. That's what Hashem Tzvaot is.
I hear you, but all right, let's not get into that, because in any event, that's probably anyway abbreviation of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, Elohei Tzvaot, meaning, which is a phrase that we have sometimes. Let's okay.
It's an interesting topic, the holistic psalter, but it is Psalm 50 that has.
So what is your claim about that? What is your claim about Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh Tzvaot? That's secondary, and the original one was Elohei Tzvaot? Is that what your claim is?
I'm just saying that this is a big topic. I gave a lecture about this I think more than a year ago already at the SBL. I'm not the only person to say this, but the idea that the Elohistic Psalter is some sort of find replace from Hashem to Elohim simply does not work. What exactly it is a complicated question, but it is not a find replace from Hashem to Elohim, and the claim that it doesn't make sense to say things like Elohim Elohecha, that there's something logically problematic with that, is nonsense. There's nothing wrong with it. Because,
all right, let's look at the Ten Commandments, because that's fascinating.
Okay, all right. So the
whole block of commandments in chapters 12 through 26 isn't there, right?
Nothing.
And the standard scholarly explanation, correct me if I'm wrong, it's been a while since I've studied this, is that's the oldest part of Deuteronomy 12 through 26.
Good job. Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. And so you remember it very well all these years later. But one of the consequences of this being authentic, if it is authentic, is that theory is wrong. In other words, it's wrong to say that the book of Deuteronomy evolved, like started with a kernel that is the law, and the narrative was added secondarily. but that never made any sense anyway.
Or maybe there was the chapters 12 through 26 as one document from, I don't know, whatever century, and then there was the and look, I don't believe this because I'm a bit of a biblical fundamentalist who believes Moses wrote the whole thing, Moses and Joshua, whatever. But I want to learn about this. I do think this is fascinating, right? I want to hear these perspectives. I think it's important to hear what scholars are saying. I think we can learn about that. I think we can learn a lot about the text by hearing what scholars are saying. And look, that's a faith statement, right? Meaning, if this is the conclusion you come to from a humanistic perspective, I want to hear that. I want to see what I can learn from that. So, all right, but maybe there's chapters 12 through 26 from the 9th century BCE. I'm just making stuff up. And then this was written in the 8th century BCE, and then Josiah.
That's correct.
Josiah came along and put them together, right? I mean, how do we know that's not the case?
That's hypothetically completely possible.
Okay.
But again, so we keep on saying that we should look at the text. We haven't done so much
Let's
of
do
it.
it.
But I'm just going to flag that one thing that we can look at is whether the narrative looks like it knows the law and vice versa.
Okay.
So, spoiler alert, in my opinion, the law is very, very consistently makes it clear that it's from the context of, Moses's speech. It's like, when you enter the land, and this will happen and that will happen, and the law doesn't sound like something that's just plopped in there from somewhere else. It references the narrative in its context, whereas the extent to which the narrative is familiar with the law is a more complicated question, which we should look at specifically. But if you wanted to see the Decalogue, here it is. So in
number 49 there. Oh, you're trying
the Valediction of Moses, the Shema appears as a preface to
wow.
the Decalogue.
So Shema Yisrael Elohim Eloheinu Elohim Echad, instead of Hero Israel, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh is our God, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh is one. It's Hero Israel.
I would translate it differently, but yes.
Yeah. Oh, how would you translate it? You mean, okay, how you translate the Shema, you're saying. All right.
Yeah, the syntax, I mean, it's a difficult verse, but
how do you translate this the way it's written? Elohim is our God, Elohim is one, or Elohim our God is one God? How do you translate that?
I think Elohim Eloheinu is probably, I don't think that Eloheinu is a predicate. I think it's probably the Lord our God, or sorry, Elohim our God. I would translate this as, "Hear, O Israel, Elohim our God is a single God."
Okay. All right, fair enough. You can translate the Shema that way.
Yeah.
Meaning even Shema, even with Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, you can translate.
Not really, because what does Hashem Echad mean? That's a very difficult phrase, Hashem Echad. If I say Nehemia is one, what does that mean?
Okay.
What would you beat to?
Well, I mean, absolutely. Meaning that meaning when it comes to God, well, I mean, now we're getting into really dangerous theological areas, dangerous in the sense that we'll never get out of this topic.
Anyway,
meaning like the fact that Elohim has a plural ending.
Yes, beautiful. That makes sense in V, but it doesn't make sense in Deuteronomy.
No, it does, because it's Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh Eloheinu with a plural ending. There's a Yud there. Here, there's no Yud.
Right.
So it could be
the subject of the sentence. The subject of the sentence in Deuteronomy is Hashem, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. Here, the subject is Elohim. So here, we could be talking about the plurality of Elohim. In Deuteronomy, the only thing that's Eloheinu is something that modifies the subject Hashem.
Okay. So how would you translate
So like what you're talking about is Hashem.
How would you translate the Deuteronomy version of the Shema?
I think it's arguably untranslatable.
Okay.
I mean, it doesn't make sense to say is one, because there's no, to use the Talmudic term, there's no hava amina, like there's no reason to.
No, there is, because he just said Eloheinu, our Elohim. Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh is our Elohim. And then,
but you don't need the word Eloheinu, right? Like we know who Hashem is, right? So the sentence would make logical sense if it didn't have Eloheinu.
No, but
Hashem Echad.
No, but if you're a Moabite, Kamosh is your Elohim. Meaning the Moabite would say Kamosh Eloheinu.
Sure.
And the Sidonian would say Ashtoret Eloheinu.
Yeah.
And then, maybe some other gods along with there, right?
Yeah.
So, all right, Toph. And you will love Elohim. Well, I'll let you translate verse or section 47 here. Can you keep going?
Okay, so here, because it's a preface to the Decalogue,
Mm-hmm.
better known as the Ten Commandments, but
Mm-hmm.
erroneously known as the Ten Commandments. So
Okay.
it's referring to Devarim. Devarim is the same term that's used for the 10 proclamations, right? The 10 utterances. So
Yes.
these Devarim are presumably the ones that we're about to hear in a few moments.
Okay.
So hear, O Israel, Elohim our God is a single God, and you shall love Elohim your God with all your heart and all your soul very much. It's not כל מאודיך, but לי מאוד מאוד. והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום, and these words that I'm commanding you today shall be על לבביך, upon your heart, ושיננתם לכל בניך, and you shall repeat them or have them memorize. All your sons shall memorize them. ודיברת אותם, and you shall speak them. בשבתך בביתך, when you sit at home, ובלכתך בדרך, and as you walk on the path. בשוכבך ובקומך, when you lie down and get up. וקשרתם אותם לאות על ידיך, and you shall tie them as I think something like proclamation, but that's you'll have to look
So
at
oath, which is normally
the
translated sign, you say means proclamation. Okay.
I just published an article together with the linguist Nama Patel about the
Okay.
semantics of ot. So if anyone's interested, it's in Vetus
We'll put a
Testamentum.
link on the website, nehemiaswell.com. You'll
Sure.
send me the link.
So the meaning of ot is complex, but in any case, this isn't really different to what we have in Deuteronomy. Ukshaltem otam leot al yedecha, you shall tie them as an ot upon your arm. V'hayu latet mofet is probably what it says here, although part of it is reconstructed, but they shall give and that's a counterpart to ot, so whatever you think ot is,
Whatever oat means.
it means
Okay,
something similar. Beinenecha, between your eyes. Uchtavta otam, and you shall write them al mezuzot or mezuzat beitecha ushe'arecha, and you shall write them on the doorposts of your house and gate. Ki Elohim karatim chabrit b'chorev, for Elohim made a pact with you at Horeb b'yom hakahal, and on the day of the assembly. Vanochi amadti ben Elohim uvenechem ba'et hazot, and I stood between Elohim and you at that time, or at this time. Ki pachadta b'pnei ha'esh, for you were afraid of the fire. V'lo alitem, or lo alita ahar, and you didn't go up the mountain. La'gid lachem dvar Elohechem, to give you the word of your God, lemor, as follows. And then we have the Decalogue. Anochi Elohim Elohecha asher hecharticha me'eretz Mitzrayim mibeit avadim. I am Elohim your God who freed you from Egypt, from the land of Egypt, from the house of bondage, or house of slaves, from the slave house. But you'll notice that there's a different verb here, so it's freed you as opposed to.
So the word cherut, which is certainly a word every Israeli is familiar with, freedom, is that a word? And I don't know off the top of my head. Is that a word that we find in biblical Hebrew other than here?
We have the root in various contexts, but we don't have this exact verb. We do have this verb in Aramaic. Shichrer. L'shachrer is the cognate in Aramaic. But,
okay.
But this form is...
That's a shafel form, and this is...
Right, which is the same, right? That's the Aramaic counterpart to hifil, right?
Uh-huh. Okay.
Or in those dialects. So we have freed you. Lo ta'asu lachem pesel v'chol tmuna asher b'shamayim mimal. Don't make a statue or image of anything that b'shamayim mimal, that's in heavens above, v'asher ba'aretz mitachat, on the land below, v'asher b'mayim mitachat la'aretz, or in the water beneath the land. Lo tishtachu lahem v'lo ta'ovdem. Don't bow to them and don't worship them, let's say. Anochi Elohim Elohecha. And then we have this refrain. I am Elohim your God. Then next.
So what's the significance of I am Elohim your God? Meaning, isn't it, and I'm genuinely asking. In other words, whoever you believe is, I mean, maybe this is a modern question, right? meaning whoever you believe is Elohim is going to be Elohim, right? Whereas I am Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God, be like, I am Kamosh, your God. I am
Well, it
Ashtovet.
depends how Elohim is being used, right? So in Genesis 1, Elohim is used as a name, right? It says, Vayomer Elohim yehi or, and Elohim said, let there be light. So it's being used in the same way here as the name of a God.
Okay.
That's something that's familiar from the Bible, right? Elohim can be used in different ways. It can be used to mean lowercase God. It can be used to mean gods, plural, but it can also be used as Mr. Elohim, God, capital G, God.
Okay.
It's like Muslims have say there is no God but God.
No, but they also say that Allah is a proper name. And I've
Right,
had
but,
this
but in
conversation.
the English version of that is there is no God but God. That's
Well,
the standard
yes,
English
yes
version.
and no, meaning if you that's a complicated question that we should save for
But I'm saying like the actual text
conversation
is
with a
there's no
Muslim.
God but God in versions that I've seen.
Uh-huh.
Second God often capitalized because there it's a proper noun. There's no God but capital G God. So this would be very similar. In any case, it's exactly what we have in Psalm 50, right? Elohim Elohecha Anochi. Same thing. So whatever is going on here is also going on in
No, unless that's a
in
search and
Psalm.
replace, meaning based on your
Okay, well you can
hypothesis there.
whatever this is, so you could say that this is a search and replace.
Well, no, but you're saying okay, it isn't okay. Meaning your explanation
Like I
here.
said, I mean, if this is an uncle,
Yeah.
then you could say
Uh,
that the original version was
uh,
Hashem, and that
but that's
this
not your
branch
argument.
became
Your
Elohim.
argument here is, am I right? Well, tell me, what's your argument here about
I,
the use of Elohim?
I initially assumed everything that you're saying
Hmm.
when I dealt with this text. I took for granted that Hashem is original and Elohim was some sort of find replace for the same reasons that you're citing.
Right. Fair enough.
Um,
Okay.
and I came to think otherwise. I'm not going to, I'm not 100% sure about it, but I think that the preponderance of evidence supports Elohim being original, not only here, but also in other places. We're going all over the map, but I'm happy to say just in brackets, just briefly, I think that there's good evidence elsewhere in the Bible that places
Yeah.
that we have Hashem sometimes originally said Elohim. I'll give you one such example now
Yeah.
quickly. In the story of Jacob in Beit El,
Uh-huh.
he says something that is grammatically problematic and contextually problematic. He says,
Okay.
"Achen yesh Adonai b'makom hazeh v'anochi lo yadati." He says
Okay.
there is Hashem, there is the tetragram, but he
Where's
doesn't.
Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh?
It says Yud Hey Vav Hey.
Yeah.
Grammatically, very strange to say yesh.
Genesis 28:16. Okay. So you're
Okay,
saying originally
Achen
it
yesh
said,
Hashem b'makom hazeh v'anochi lo yadati is very strange both grammatically because it would be like for me to say Achen yesh Nehemia b'makom hazeh would sound weird. It's no problem for me to say Achen yesh shulchan b'makom hazeh because there's a set of shulchanot, of tables, and so I can say, behold, there is a table. That's fine. But for me to say, behold, there is a Nehemia is weird because we don't normally think of a set of Nehemias. By a similar token, to say Achen yesh Hashem, unless
wait,
you
so you're saying that Yud-Heh, so the way it reads now in our Masoretic text, this is Genesis 28:16. You're correct. I'm trying to understand what you're saying.
yeah.
Would you translate something like, and he said, surely there is a Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh in this place, and therefore it should say a
I
Elohim.
think we'd be forced to say something like that, right?
I mean, I wouldn't read it that way, but okay.
Is there any other example for how yesh is used? I
Uh,
can give you an answer to
well,
that. No.
here's so the word makom here is extremely important because makom isn't just a place; it's a place where a deity dwells. You see that even in up until relatively recently, you would go around the land of Israel, and the locals would worship at a makam, which has more of a meaning than just a place, right? And whenever it talks in Deuteronomy, at least in our version of Deuteronomy, the place that Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh will place his name, right? Well, what does that even mean, right? So there's some kind of concept there where there's a presence of the name Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh that's dwelling in a certain geographical location called a makom. That's my understanding.
But all that's fine. No, I have no problem with any of that. But I'm making two different points. One
Okay.
is a grammatical one, and one is a contextual one. And so the grammatical one is that we would expect yesh to be followed by by something that is indefinite. So let me share. You see the screen where I'm typing yesh?
Yeah.
Um,
And which software is this?
This is Accordance.
Okay, that's what I use. All right, you have a different layout, but it's the same basic program. Okay. Thinking
I
is
just searched for the word yesh in the entire Hebrew Bible, followed by a proper noun. Look how many results there.
Yeah.
Oh, that's sorry. Let me change this to words. There. 3 results. What are those 3 results?
I mean, I see them.
Hashem in Genesis 28 that we're talking about. Hayesh Hashem in Exodus 17.
Yeah.
And Veyesh Hashem in Judges 6. So yesh is never used with a proper noun, either person or place or God, any place in the Bible, except for in the phrase Yesh Hashem.
And so is your argument that in all 3 places it was originally Yesh Elohim?
Yes, that is my argument. But let me tell you why that makes so much sense in Genesis 28. So not only does it resolve this grammatical problem of having something definite, like a proper noun, following yesh, there is, but also, what is this the story of? This is the story of like this etiology about a certain place that is called what?
Beit-El.
Beit-El.
Yeah, the house of El. Yeah.
Yeah. So when we hear the story of Peniel, it's like I've seen Elohim, Panim el Panim, and it was called Peniel. So Elohim called it Peniel. Here he sees Yesh Adonai.
Yesh El b'makom hazeh. That's what you.
No, Elohim.
Okay.
Just like Peniel is Elohim Panim el Panim. Right? So just like
God face to face, and it was called Peniel, the face of God. Okay, so you're saying Beit-El, it has to say there is Elohim.
It resolves both a grammatical problem and a contextual problem in the story, and the fact that the only other places that we have yesh followed by a proper noun in the entire Bible are also Hashem is something that should give us pause. So maybe, can we look at the search and replace went the other way.
So let's look at something completely. Can we? I mean, this is off the topic, but this is fascinating. I don't agree with this, but this is fascinating to hear these perspectives. It definitely is challenging, and I really appreciate this. So there's a passage that I absolutely love because it has some very shocking implications, and I don't know what your view is, and I'm putting you on the spot, which isn't fair. But 2 Samuel 5:20, it's the story of Baal Pratzim.
Yeah.
And so we have here, and David came to Baal Pratzim, and David smote there, and he said, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh has burst forth upon my enemies. That's maybe disagree with the translation. It's fine, whatever. Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh has burst forth upon my enemy, or has burst my enemies before me, as the water burst forth. Therefore, he called the name of the place Baal Pratzim, which the way it reads in the Masoretic text would imply that David identified Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh as Baal, which is other evidence to suggest as well. And I didn't come up with this. This is, I think, a pretty standard explanation of the passage, right? In other words, we have a really early core here of syncretism, or maybe, let's say, pre-Josianic from a critical perspective, right? Meaning exactly what Hosea talks about, where he says, you'll no longer call me Baali, you'll call me Ishi, right? Same kind of thing, right? So they were calling you to have a Baal that's kind of, I think, undisputed. Would you argue here, Vayomel Palatz Elohim et Oivai, right? I mean, or maybe David, or maybe the original. I'm putting words in your mouth. How do you? Could you do something with this in the same vein as Beit-El? Meaning, you'd say there's a theological problem or a contextual problem here. Who's he talking about? Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh or Baal?
So, I mean, I think there are really only 2 options here. One is, maybe there are more, but the two options that come to mind. One is that Baal can be used as an honorific also for Hashem in a similar way to Adonai, and there's someone who wrote an article, I think, very recently about the use of Baal as like in reference to different deities. So that's one possibility.
Because
But
Baal
that
means
possibility
master.
is,
For those who
huh?
don't know. I'm just telling the audience who may
Yeah,
not know.
Baal means
Means
master in a
master.
similar way to Adonai.
It means
Use of
Lord.
Adonai, which also means something along the lines of
Okay.
master. Um, that being said, throughout the Bible, usually you have contrast between Baal and Adonai, and so it is not far-fetched to say that David said, "Paratz Baal et oevai, על כן קרא שם המקום ההוא בעל פרצים." I mean, or you could say that like maybe like Baal doesn't really matter, that they're thinking about it in some totally different meaning that has nothing to do with any deity. All these things that sound problematic. I think the simplest explanation is that this was originally understood to be about Baal, and yeah, so it's
But
possible
if they weren't,
find your place here from Baal to Hashem, just like we
oh,
see seems to be a find your place
okay, there you go. So
from
you're saying something that that's different than what I had always heard and understood.
what did you heard?
Meaning the standard explanation I had read that I was taught at Hebrew University was that that this idea that Yud Hey Vav Hey and Baal are meaning when Hosea chapter 2, they will no longer call me Baali, they'll call me Ishi. There was a tendency to identify Yud Hey Vav Hey and Baal as the same deity. And later prophets or Hosea would call that syncretism, but whoever worshipped that way thought, no, whatever. I mean, it's the same. The Baal is the is the master of the Baal, who is probably Hadad or something, right? Probably. Is the god who rules over the earth, and Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh does, and that's the same thing, right? Meaning, like in the same way that you'll I think the average Jew certainly would say that Allah and the God and Hashem are the same God, right? Just they attribute different things to him than we do, but it's the same thing, right? And certainly Jews coming from Muslim countries use the term Allah, and whether they are or not is way beyond the scope of this discussion, right? But there's certainly, if you ask the average Christian, they'll say no, Allah is a completely different deity and has nothing to do with the God of the Old Testament, right?
Right.
Meaning,
So
yeah.
yeah, and there are various options here. I don't know
And I'm putting you on the spot,
for
which isn't
sure.
fair. You don't feel like you have to answer, but I think it's intriguing to say, like certainly there's a greater problem here than there is in Genesis 28.
I mean, it's definitely problematic here, and it does seem like if you're going to read this in a sort of synchronic way, just take the text as it is without considering how it might have evolved, then we would say that Baal is being equated with Hashem. But an alternative is to say that this text has changed, and we already think some very similar things, right? So you have characters like here, Mephibosheth, Mephibaal, Ishboshet, Ishbaal,
Right.
which in
So there was
Chronicles,
a king of Israel who had the name Baal in his name, which is
uh,
which is really surprising.
right, one second, words here. We have Mephibosheth here in Samuel, and then
And then the
um,
parallel name in Chronicles has the word Baal, from the mouth of Baal. And
it looks
then
like it like
I think
this.
you have to make it 2 words for that to work there.
Is that what's happening, or did they just put
So,
Okay.
the mysteries of accordance.
I don't know what it wants from me anymore. But I promise that
But then the better one is the king of Israel. I mean, I find it as I mean they're both good, right? So if you look in First Chronicles 8:33, one of the sons of it's without the yud. So one of the sons of Saul is Eshbaal, and then he's called Ishboshet, man of shame,
Mhm.
in in uh in Samuel, right? So in other words, so here's really the question. Assuming there was such a figure named Eshbaal, which I believe, I don't know if you do. Who names their kid Eshbaal? Right, that's really
Someone
the
who
question. So
someone who doesn't find that problematic. So
100%.
you could.
Someone who doesn't find
The
it
point
problematic.
is, there's no question that whoever. I mean, I'm open to someone suggesting otherwise, but to me it seems like the names Mephibosheth and Mephiba and Ishbosheth show us that someone found it very upsetting or problematic for these guys to be called Ishbaal and or Eshbaal and Mephibaal, right? And so they had a problem with it.
No doubt. And then
So
Jeremiah says,
so someone else didn't have a problem with it. So maybe the reason they didn't have a problem with it is because they thought that Baal could mean Hashem and they didn't have any problem with that. Or they didn't have a problem with it because they didn't have a problem talking about Baal, like Hadad or whatever, a god who isn't Yud-Heh Vav-Heh, being
the
referenced.
irony here is that Chronicles, which is obviously a later book, seems to preserve something that's real,
That's
probably earlier.
that's not unusual at all. It's not
Mhm.
unusual at all. I mean, the fact that it was fine. That's why I was saying that this issue of like dating a book is really problematic because each one of these things evolves over such a long period of time. They have independent histories, right? So they have some common core, Chronicles and Samuel and Kings, but they had separate histories, and so maybe when they the source that had Baal that was never changed in Chronicles. Meanwhile, it was changed in Samuel Kings, and
I'm going
there's
to ask you a
no problem.
question, which is you can say I need to think about it. You don't have to answer.
Yeah.
And it's just me kind of thinking out loud, spitballing ideas. So the Samaritans have the Book of Deuteronomy, obviously with some changes.
Mm.
Um, what do you have some thoughts about the relationship between the Samaritan Deuteronomy, the maybe the Samaritan Pentateuch in general, the Jewish Deuteronomy, and the valediction of Moses?
Yeah, we still I'm conscious that we were looking at the Decalogue before and at the spy stories before that, so I'm just trying to remember to get back to it.
Okay.
Look, if you look at it, I'll share my book again now.
Meaning, I think the standard thought is the Samaritans took the Jewish Torah and tweaked it. Um,
But
and
it's trickier than that, and the Samaritan
okay,
Pentateuch clearly includes um, some more original readings than what we have in the Masoretic text, right? There's this, for example, in Genesis 22, in this binding of Isaac, the Kedah, you have Ayil achar nechaz basvach, very problematic phrase that in the Hebrew, it's very hard to parse that achal or acher or and in many other textual witnesses, including ancient translations, you have the ail echad. You saw
so
and
in other
right,
words,
and that's what we have in the
something like
Samaritan.
another ram or a ram behind the thicket in the Masoretic
Not
text.
another, right? But he just saw a right ram, and
No, or
that
he
more
saw a certain ram, or he saw one
yeah
ram or
yeah
something.
yeah yeah
Yeah.
yeah.
No, I'm
And
saying
so
the Masoretic
that's just
text
one
treats
random
it.
example, but
Yeah.
it seems
Mhm.
highly likely that that is the more original reading,
Yeah,
and
but
that
that's on
because
one
Dalet and Resh
particular.
are very similar,
Uh-huh.
um, both in Paleo Hebrew and in later Hebrew, and also even in pronunciation in some dialects. There are many cases of Dalet and Resh being confused, and
So if you're right about that, that would be something that happened in transmission, meaning the Masoretic text would have descended from a text that had echad, if you're right. And it was that text that, or some text like that, that the Samaritans took and tweaked. Meaning, I don't. You're not saying that. Well, maybe you are. I don't want to put words in your mouth.
I don't think that the Masoretic text is based on the Samaritan text.
That's
certainly.
my question. Okay.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. But I also don't think that the Samaritan text is based exactly on the Masoretic text. But
no,
I
it's
think
based on some Jewish text that the Masoretic text is a representative of, no, or is one version
maybe,
of.
yeah.
Maybe. Okay.
It's a big question. The Samaritan.
But certainly when it comes to the valediction of Moses, you wouldn't say that the Samaritan text used the valediction of Moses as a source, and the Jews also used it as a source.
No, but there are. If you look at the text of the valediction of Moses, and so let me here.
Let's get back to the text.
We've been looking at the English here, but I have this section here I call it annotated critical edition. So you see it's the text in Hebrew with tons of.
And guys, we'll put a link to this book on samuelswell.com.
Great, yeah. It's an open access book. So
we'll put it, wonderful.
Yeah, you can put the PDF if you want. Okay. So here's the Hebrew text, and here are all these notes.
How did you make this? I'm just on a technical, if you want to tell me, how did you make this an open access book? Like, how did the publisher give you permission to do that?
It cost money, and
so guys, I want to stop here for a second. Somebody might say, well, this is very sensationalistic. He's doing this to make money. He actually paid money to give people access to this. That's unbelievable.
A generous donor paid some money to to make this available open access. But I make a big effort for the things I publish to be open access in general, and in fact choose journals based on whether they are either open access or have some agreement with my university that means that it will be open access. So the article I mentioned before that I co-authored with Nama Patel is available also open access.
Wonderful. So, wow, that's great.
So I was just to answer your question about the connection to the Samaritan Pentateuch. So if you go through my notes here in this critical edition, you'll see all sorts of discussions of this phrase is slightly different.
We have this text. I see there's places where you wrote Shapira wrote, or Shapira transcription. So this is not Shapira's transcription. This is Ginsburg's translation, or what is this?
This is my transcription. But
where do you get? What do you don't have the scrolls or the manuscripts? Where are you getting?
I used everything that's available, including something that we started talking about, which was the things that I found in Berlin and the Staatsbibliothek. So just to finish that thread, interspersed among the catalogs of the manuscripts that he sold, there were 3 sheets. They weren't connected to one another, but all 3 of those sheets were transcriptions of parts of the text by Shapira. And those sheets we should talk about for a different reason, because besides helping us get better access to the text, it also gives us a window into Shapira's mind, and it suggests that Shapira was not the forger, because in these notes you can see him struggling to transcribe sections that weren't visible, and making some mistakes when he does that. For example, he's not sure about the order of the fragments. So at first he says it goes this way, and then he's like, oh no, I think this fragment actually goes over there. Stuff like that. And so it seems, before even getting into the question of whether it was authentic, just on the basis of those notes of Shapira's in this transcription, and the transcription itself, we can say that Shapira himself did not think that it was a forgery, and could not have reasonably been involved in the forgery, or couldn't have done it himself, or else he wouldn't be struggling to figure out what goes where and making mistakes in the transcription in places where we can see why he made that mistake, and it makes total sense that he made that mistake, but it doesn't make sense if he's the forger. He knows the order, right? And he knows what it says, right? Yeah. So fair enough. Now, just to answer your question about the Samaritan. So here, what you see in this particular case here, cheshbon ha'emori, mal cheshbon ha'emori. So I'm saying that both the Septuagint translation in Greek and the Samaritan Pentateuch in the original Hebrew have the same thing that we have here, Sichon Melech Heshbon HaEmori, whereas the Masoretic text doesn't have that. So like there's something here, a place here where the text of the valediction of Moses corresponds to the Samaritan Pentateuch, but not to the Masoretic text. And it also corresponds to the Septuagint, which is translated into Greek, but was translated from Hebrew, and it seems was translated from a Hebrew that matches this. There are many
So are there many instances like that? Are there many instances like that where the Samaritan and or Septuagint agree with the valediction of Moses against the Masoretic text?
Yeah.
Okay.
There are many such cases.
So at least if you're going to say it's a forgery, it was done by a scholar. You have to say that.
Correct.
Who at the very least would have known what was in, which isn't impossible, right? Kennecott was available there. You could have easily known what was in the Samaritan text.
Yeah, but we haven't gotten to the things that they couldn't have really done. But yes,
so what's that? What's something they couldn't have done?
But this is something that is the differences are just endless, endless differences, and those differences, like a word here, a word there, or like where the vav conjunction appears, and all sorts of things like that, where you see like these tiny differences between the different manuscripts, and this corresponds to this, or even to different Masoretic manuscript, but not what we have in the Leningrad Codex. He wouldn't have had the Leningrad Codex, but the point is that there are all these differences that are variants among different Masoretic manuscripts. All these sorts of things, countless tiny little differences like that, in addition to the bigger differences that we should discuss. So maybe we should go back to the story of the spies, because we had this question: does it make sense to say that this is an abridgment, whether authentic or inauthentic, an abridgment of Deuteronomy or not? So here's a good example of something to discuss. So that's what we were looking at before we got into the Decalogue, but here you can see the difference.
Can we continue with the Ten Commandments, because just so they're so interesting?
All right, so we'll do the Decalogue, then spies.
Then with spies.
And then we should talk about Sichon too. And
then and then we'll call it a day. And I appreciate you spending all this time. This is really generous of you. We're going to break it into a number of episodes, because I think people probably don't have the bandwidth for more than like about an hour. So this will be like 2 or 3 or 4 episodes. I don't know.
And maybe you can reorder it also when we jump around.
I think we probably won't do that. We'll probably just, break it. And look, people are used to me, like, it's kind of like Joe Rogan-esque, where he just goes on for 3 hours talking about all kinds of things. People are used to me doing that. So
all right, sounds good. All right, so in the Decalogue, unlike in the Masoretic text and all other versions of the Decalogue, where it's actually surprisingly difficult to figure out what the 10 are, here there's no question what the 10 are. We know exactly what the 10 are for several reasons. It's overdetermined.
And it's so difficult that different traditions break them up differently. Like famously,
absolutely.
Catholics and Protestants will argue over this, and then Jews even within the Hebrew you have or let's say the Masoretic text, you have different accents that break it up sort of differently. All right, or differently the verses.
Big mess. Which is it's sort of ironic that the 10 Commandments, like, how do you get to 10? You wouldn't expect it to be so difficult. But here it's not difficult. Okay. Here we know exactly what the 10 are. And this is why, one of the reasons that I object to calling it the 10 Commandments, and I'm not alone in this, is that the Bible doesn't call it the 10 Commandments. It refers to it as devarim, utterances or proclamations. And if you're counting commandments, you're going to end up tying yourself in knots, because that's not what the Bible's counting. So, I mean, you're going to have trouble anyway, because there's no way to really get to 10 in the Masoretic text. No matter what you do, I think it's not so difficult in the Samaritan Pentateuch to get to 10. Much easier. But here we have 10, but they're not 10 commandments. They're 10 proclamations. The first proclamation is I am Elohim your God who freed you. You shall not have any, you shall not make any statues or images,
So
and
each
you
one
shall not
ends
bow
with the
down to them
phrase
or
I
worship
am.
them.
So each what people normally call commandments, right? Each item here ends with I am Elohim your Elohim.
Your God. You're right. So
Right?
you have this refrain,
Your God.
which tells you where it ends. That's one thing that tells you. There's also line breaks
Hmm.
in the manuscript. You don't have line breaks elsewhere.
So this brings me back to a question I asked before. So what is the source of your text here? I mean, one of your sources is the transcription of Shapira, but there must
So
be some other source,
there's
right?
a transcription, the partial transcription that I found of Shapira's. There's the transcription of Christian David Ginsburg.
Okay.
There's a transcription of Hilman Gutta and Eduard Meyer, German scholars who published a little booklet. And there's various drawings, different
Mm,
drafts of different drawings,
okay.
different discussions, notes, all sorts. I used
Well,
everything.
although the scrolls are lost, we have a pretty good idea of what the contents were.
Yes, correct.
Okay, that's important. All right, we didn't
But
say
we don't.
the last 2 hours.
Everyone talks about two manuscripts, and we rarely have both. So it seems like basically we have a transcription of one manuscript for the first half and the other manuscript for the other half.
Are
And
there any overlaps between the two manuscripts?
it seems like there were overlaps,
Okay.
almost complete overlap, but we don't have separate copies. In a couple of places, people say, the other version says something else there.
Oh, really?
There were some small textual differences between them, but
Okay.
which is another interesting detail, right? There were two. It's not the Shapira scroll. It's because it's not a scroll. It's in the singular, and it's not a scroll at all because it wasn't rolled up. It's two separate manuscripts.
It was folded, right?
Two folded separate manuscripts
Okay.
that looked different from one another. They were both folded, but looked quite different.
Are there other examples
different formats, different heights, widths, and
I'm asking because I don't know. Are there other examples of folded manuscripts from, and I can't say from this period because we don't know what period it's from, but
good question. I recently submitted an article where the answer is yes.
okay.
Yeah.
Things that aren't letters.
Dead Sea, and things that are not only letters, but yes, letters absolutely. But
Yeah.
Dead Sea Scrolls, and an overlooked fact about the Dead Sea Scrolls is that they include folded manuscripts, or at least even some of the scrolls used to be folded manuscripts and then were turned into scrolls in antiquity.
That sounds, I can't wait to see that article. That's very fascinating. Wow. All right.
But
yeah.
So right, we have line breaks. We have we have this refrain, which is very similar to something that we see not in the Decalogue, but in Leviticus 19, which is this passage that corresponds very closely to the Decalogue. And this is a well-known fact that was known also to the rabbis in antiquity. But there we have this refrain, Anochi Adonai Elohecha, but we don't see it in, I mean, the phrase appears twice in the Decalogue, but it doesn't appear as a refrain after every proclamation. So that's one thing that tells us. So we've now covered two things that tell us what's what. And then the last thing that we also have blessings and curses in the valediction of Moses. In Deuteronomy, we only have curses. We don't have the corresponding blessings. So like in Deuteronomy, we have Aru ha'ish asher, whatever, cursed is the man who blah, blah, blah. Many of which correspond to the Decalogue, but not all of which in Deuteronomy. But here, every single one corresponds in order to one of the proclamations. And we have a corresponding version, Baruch ha'ish asher, etc. Blessed is the man.
Oh, cool. All right.
And they also correspond in order. So it's extremely clear what the 10 are.
Okay.
And what we see is that
So I'm noticing here that the taking the name in vain is not here, which is interesting because it doesn't have the name.
Right, but it has something similar, but in a different place. Lo tishava bishmi lashake.
Don't swear falsely in my name. Okay. Or maybe you translate it differently. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah,
Okay.
and that is almost exactly what we see in Leviticus 19. Also, various references to the Decalogue in the Bible, including in Jeremiah, have this form rather than lo tisa et Shem Elokecha lashav or whatever, lo tishava b'shmi l'shaker. So
instead of don't take the name of in vain, it's don't swear falsely in my name. Interesting. Okay.
yeah,
Which is how
so
the name in vain was certainly interpreted later by Jews, and you're saying maybe even in the time of Jeremiah. Or okay.
right. In
Interesting.
various places where we see allusions to the Decalogue,
Hmm.
we find that form and not
Interesting. Do you have an article about that?
I mention it in chapter 4 of my book.
All right, I'm gonna make a note. I'm gonna look at that. It's Psalms and Jeremiah. All right, interesting. Very interesting. Okay, beautiful. All right, so what are our commandments? So let's go back to Shabbat.
So
Shabbat was not really that different.
Shabbat, it's a little bit different. It starts with Kadesh instead of Shemol or Zachor.
Okay.
So it's Kadesh et Yom HaShvi v'Shavata bo. Also, all 10 are spoken in the first person by God to the people. Right? So it's Kisheshet Yamim Asiti, not Kisheshet Yamim Asa Hashem.
Wow.
Which fits with, this refrain.
In other words, in the Masoretic text is, as, for 6 days, let's see, he created, and here it's I created, or I made, whatever.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the whole business of punishing children and children's children doesn't appear in the context of the proper worship of God, but in the context of this false oath. Right.
Okay.
So, lo tishava b'shmi l'shaker, you shall not swear falsely in my name. Ki anochi akane et avon avot al banim al shilashim ve'al ribeim lenosei shmi l'shaker. Anochi Elohim Elohecha. Wow. And then, so that's interesting. And here's.
Can you translate that one that you just read?
So I will avenge. Maybe it's difficult.
Zealous or something.
Yeah, it's difficult to translate.
Okay.
Yeah. Like you have things like Hem kinuni belo el vani kniem belo am. It's a tricky. But I will do something with the sin of fathers upon sons and upon the third generation and the fourth generation for those who take my name falsely. I'm Elohim your God. Okay. And then here's the kicker. So we talked about how difficult it is to count to 10 in the Masoretic text. Yeah. So the implication here is that the Masoretic text actually only has 9. And that's why, because the 10th one is Lo tisna et achicha bilvavecha. Thou shalt not hate thy brother in thy heart. I am Elohim your God.
Which we have in Leviticus 19.
Exactly, in Leviticus 19, which we already talked about, it being a parallel to the Decalogue. So that is one of very many ways in which Leviticus 19 corresponds more closely to the Decalogue as it appears here than the Decalogue as it appears in the Masoretic text.
Okay.
All of this is discussed in chapter 4 of my book.
All right. Guys, you heard it here. Go do more research. Chapter 4 of his book. Fascinating stuff. Don't hate your brother in your heart in the 10 commandments or 10 things or whatever. Wow. What does it mean when you have something in brackets here? Meaning
it means that it's a reconstruction.
What's that?
Yeah. The brackets are reconstructions.
Oh, okay.
So you can see, for example, re'echa here, lo tachmod eshet, and then it could be achicha, for example. I don't know, but I reconstructed re'echa on the basis of the parallels. I didn't, I would default to what we have elsewhere unless I have reason to say otherwise.
Okay. All right. Wow. All right, let's go back to the spies.
Okay, spies. So
you have been listening to Hebrew Voices with Nehemia Gordon. Thank you for supporting Nehemia's Makor Hebrew Foundation. Learn more at nehemiaswall.com.